Good afternoon, all. We're back in room 2 again, and this second clinic of the afternoon is Chuck Jenkins. Chuck Jenkins is going to be talking about trees as supporting actors. Really cool because in the area I model and obviously what he does, there's lots of trees. Chuck Jenkins works and lives in the upstate of South Carolina. He has always had an interest in trains, starting as a child, and has been in and out of the hobby since then. He was exposed to full scales, 1-to-1, Fairbanks Morse, Alco, Cooper, Bessemer, and EMD diesels as a shipboard engineer in the Coast Guard. So when he couldn't work in the hobby, he could at least get some really good sound effects in the engine room. So I will drop out in just a moment and we'll leave Chuck in, and he'll be doing his presentation on trees. Welcome, Chuck.
Thanks, Perry. Glad to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. So, when we're ready, I can go. All right. So, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to talk a little bit about making trees, and I called it as supporting actors and adding variety to the layout's visual story. A little bit about me, a little more about me. My name is Chuck Jenkins. Born and raised in South Miami, Florida. I went to the Coast Guard Academy and then later on in George Washington University. Married 34 years, 3 daughters, 1 grandson. You already heard I was 9 years as a shipboard engineer, 32 years in the private sector, in engineering. And currently I lead a global engineering team in 6 locations across the US, the UK, Holland, and Italy. And non-working activity, you can see gardening, remodeling, woodworking. I do run reading, travel, and model railroading, which is why we're here, not to hear about me. So what do I have? I have a 1-by-8 foot shelf layout in HO scale. I won't read this, you can read it. The hobby really started out, my father, in Miami, we would go to a Gold Coast Railroad, which was a railroad down in Homestead area, and ride that maybe on a Saturday afternoon or something like that. He was in, originally he was from Sardis, Georgia, which is a small town between Waynesboro and Sylvania. And the interesting thing about Sardis is that it was a coaling location for the Savannah and Atlanta Railway. And in fact, the coaling tower was still there when we would go there. I think it's still there to this date. A few years ago, my daughters gave me a book for Father's Day. I think it was called Mixed Train Daily by Lucius Beebe. And as I was thumbing through it and reading it, I came across a photo that said, I said to myself, well, that looks like the coaling tower in Sardis. And sure enough, that was about, that article, or that chapter, excuse me, was about the S&A Railroad. So I've done a little bit of updating since I gave this presentation to the Palmetto Division in March. And I'll just jump through a couple of photos, photo images of my layout. It's, I wanted to show something that was not exactly a Class 1 railroad, not perfectly maintained. And some of this is just some experimenting with different effects for the scenery. Some may recognize the structures, or very old Sidem models and some AHMs and things like that, which got put away in a box many, many years ago and then put back out. Again, just other images. Those crates actually have labels on them that actually have a ship to address. I tried a little bit of experimenting with that. So now we're getting into why you came here. Trees as supporting actors. So scenery it helps create the stage for the model railroad world. The trains, the locomotives, the cars, those are really the main actors. And everything else supports the story we try to tell. So with that in mind, as I was building my layout and thinking of how do I want to scenic it, how do I want it to look, I was trying to get some inspiration for what to put on it. And so I thought, well, why don't I just look around? So this is actually the scene from the parking lot of the company where I work. And what I'd like you to take away is the variety of colors, the shapes, and the fact that you've got some, like this one, that are leaning and are a different color from all the others. Alongside a road, you get a lot of little weedy growth, brambles and whatever along the edge. And these are not full-size ponderosa pines or sequoias. These are like just little stuff that most people, don't pay attention to. And in fact, this one, the photo image, it shows a dead tree that's along the interstate. And you can see it's in the background, and I apologize for the less than ideal quality, but it's the limbs are very stubby, so they're not the fine feathery limbs. So 3 methods that I want to talk about today. So you can purchase a kit from Woodland Scenics. I'm going to show a little bit on sedum garden plant, and then azaleas, so the prunings to make dead trees. So Woodland Scenics. So I bought a kit to make 3-inch upswept trees off of eBay. And it came with all the materials needed to make the trees. A few things you have to add, paint and whatever. But it comes the metal molded trunks and limbs. You clean off the flash, you wash it in soap and water, you prime it, and then there's a finely ground foam in a mesh that you cut and apply it as the foliage. What I found was that the cleaning off the flash, I didn't spend a lot of time doing that. And in the end, it didn't matter because I couldn't see it. Once it was on the layout and once it was painted, I couldn't notice the little pieces of flash. So as it's out of the box, and you can see the flash on some of the pieces or the mold seams. So what I use is just a piece of pink foam board, maybe I think it's 3/4 inch, and paper on top of it. And you can see it holds the base of the tree. And so I'll spray it with first a black and a gray and a tan, very lightly misting it. The spray paint, I prefer to use flat colors, and I hold it probably 3 feet away. Maybe I'll set this up on the trash can or something outside and just lightly mist it. So I'm not trying to coat it, just mist it. And you can see the misting effects on the foam itself. This is the branch and foliage material as it came out of the box. And there was an awful lot of loose material. So maybe I'd wound up with a very old kit and it had separated itself. Cut and apply it. And those little hooks on the end of the limbs is what keeps it in place. I actually found that just a little touch of spray adhesive helped hold the foliage inside of the netting. Again, another photo of it. And here, once you can notice that once it's painted, you really don't see the seams of the mold parting lines any longer. And the mottled effect, the speckled effect, is what I've seen in nature as from actual trees. They're not one solid color, but the bark has cast little shadows, and there's different bits of moss or algae or moss that's growing onto lichen perhaps. And it's a variety. No two are the same. So sedum. So sedum is a perennial. It's a garden plant. And what I do is in December or January here, I'll go and I'll harvest the dead twigs or the stems that were last year's flowers. And the little flower heads, I'll brush them off, and the leaves that might remain. I'll spray it with a weak solution of bleach, because by the time I get out there, it's had a little bit of weather on it, and there might be some mold growing, or there might be maybe an insect hanging around. So I try to spray it with a little bit of bleach solution, and then I'll hit it with a flat gray primer. Then I'll mist it with a satin black or a tan, maybe a little bit of light green here and there to create a moss effect, and a little bit of white. Again, it's all from a distance. It's just a very light misting. And if I want to, if I'm feeling really ambitious, I'll take some acrylic craft paints from a Hobby Lobby or Michael's or Walmart or something, or my wife's craft tray, and use them for accent colors on the trunks. Just again, creating a different effect. Then I'll take a spray adhesive. Any number of spray adhesives will work. I've used the Loctite has a brand, Elmer's has a brand. Spray that on the tips, and then dip it in ground foam, and then plant it in a hole in the layout. So here's some pictures. This is the sedum in the yard. My wife wanted me to say this was our neighbor's yard, but I'm not going to lie, it's ours. This is the new growth. And so these are the branches that have been harvested. And this gives you a scale for the relative size. And there's some that are curved, there's some that are straight, variety of sizes. And what's interesting is that the little ones that break off actually can be used as little shrubs that are just undergrowth within your forest or alongside the road. So here they are. There's the foam again, sprayed, and then dipped, sprayed and dipped with the adhesive, and then dipped in the foliage. The woodland scenic foliage that was excess is actually what's shown here. I found that was very, very fine and actually very nice, made a very nice effect on these trees that I made. The ones that the trunks or the stems that are too long, I'll take the craft paint and paint them to look like either old logs or dead logs or even rotting logs. And so as you can see on the layout here, there's a pile of logs in the foreground, but in the background next to the backdrop, there's some that are in amongst the trees. Some look like fallen branches or fallen trees kind of leaning into the crook of another one. Again, just another view of it. Shorter ones can be alongside a road. Slightly different view. Again, showing a combination of the effects. One other thing to point out is that if you drive down the road and you look at trees where there's been a cut, either by a railway right-of-way or even a road, when there's a new cut that's gone through, you'll see that many of the trees, their trunks are not fully branched out, so to speak. And it's because the trees are going in a stand of trees. They're looking for the sun, they're reaching for the sun, and so the limbs along the trunk don't get as much sun, and they're supporting each other. But when a cut or a road has gone through, you then see the bare sides of the trees. And so you can have that effect also. So azaleas as dead trees. So clearly in this area and the southeast and really all across the country, azaleas are an available shrub. And I've used them when I prune them and remove dead sections. I tend to look at them to see, okay, is this something that might be of use? The thing with this, that I've found with azaleas is that they have to be completely dry. So I won't go out and take a fresh pruning and immediately start working on that. They have to be dry, perhaps months. If not, I may just leave them in a box for a year in the garage. The loose bark, I'll remove that with a wire brush, and any little tiny twiggy growth, I'll cut that off. Now this one I do spray with a weak bleach solution and then follow with soap and water, because these I have found normally will have some small insect larvae on there, little spiders or also. Allow them to dry, and then once again, hit them with that flat gray primer. Craft paints. With the azaleas, I'm not going to put them as a living tree. These are going to become a dead tree. And so it's really it's an effort in trying to create the illusion of a hole in the tree, or where there's been a lightning strike that's killed the tree, or something broken off and is rotting. So I tend to use the tans and the use of grays and whites. I've also experimented a little bit with a very light green to create a moss effect, and that also works pretty nicely. A small nail in the bottom of it helps hold it in place on the layout if the stem is a little bit large. So this gives the relative size. Again, a nail, small nail, it's a 2-penny nail. It's trusty pink foam, spray base. And so I'll spray it with the gray, and then I'll mist it with the black and perhaps a tan. And then this is the effect. I hope it comes through well enough on the presentation that I've experimented with one particular azalea to try to create the effect of a hole in the tree. From a distance, it looks that way. It's hard to see it this close, unfortunately. But you can, the colors I used started with the gray and the misting of the black. And then there's grays, additional gray, various colors of tan, again, a little more black here and there with the craft paints, a little white here and there. And the effect is to create the illusion of a dead tree. Dead tree with the supporting a broken limb. So combined effects on the layout. You have living trees, leaning trees, you have dead logs, fallen limbs. There's a little bit of everything. And really, for inspiration, all you have to do is, as you're outside driving, looking at photographs, you can see the variety there. And so here's the combination of the sedum, the woodland scenic, and the azaleas. Again, we've seen this one before, I think. So in summary, the trees really set the stage, and you can purchase them. You can make them from a combination of natural purchased materials. You can do a kit. there's a variety there and really depends on your budget and your modeling skills. I think that the azalea and the sedum it's very easy to do, and it's certainly an easy way to create a variety on your layout. Nature shows that there's variety everywhere, and so you can just use that to create some added interest in your layout. So, and that's the final of this presentation. It's a very short clinic. So if you need another few minutes before another one, you have that now.
Appreciate it, Chuck. I haven't seen questions pop up yet, but I like your concept in the very beginning of your clinic where you were talking about different colors, different textures, different heights of things at the ground level and in the trees, because that's something that I talk about when I do scenery. And I ran a clinic during the Gateway X convention for ground cover, producing more realistic, not monochrome nor mono height ground cover. I like your concept on that very, very much.
Thank you. It's interesting because when I gave the clinic in March, I came home and I looked at what I had done and I thought to myself, well, this thing is way too tall. There's some real dimensional issues going on here. And so I wound up shortening some of the trees. One of the clinic earlier today by Jonathan from the UK on trees for the Pacific Northwest, very well done. And a point that was made was sometimes we make the trees too tall and it overpowers the rest of the layout. And it makes things look, well, just unrealistic. And I noticed that I had done that. So I've fixed that a little bit on mine. In fact, this, I think you can see it now. This was in the final couple slides, this would be way too large for HO, but it would perhaps be appropriate for an O scale.
Yeah, it seems like it, although, you know, a tree might really be hundreds of feet tall, you know, 100 feet tall, but if we put too many 100-foot tall trees or any on our railroad, yeah, it would look odd.
It would. It certainly would.
A couple of people have popped in questions. In addition to the plants that you mentioned, there's a comment about something called mare's tail, otherwise known as horseweed, and I've heard of it, although I'm not sure that I've ever seen it.
No, I haven't seen it myself. One other plant that I have used, and it's in one of the images, was Nandina, which is sometimes called heavenly bamboo. It's an invasive plant, but the berries at the end of the season, the little bracts that hold the berries, if you get rid of the berries, they could almost be used as perhaps a pine tree. They're very conical. It's a conical shaped arrangement. I experimented with that early on, wasn't happy with the results, but it's still on the layout, just buried. It's just filler, is what it is.
Background trees, which we all need. Do you do anything, and there are a couple more questions that have popped in, do you do anything to preserve your natural materials before you turn them into trees?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think that the spraying with the Clorox helps. But then I think my thought is that the spray paint is going to help preserve it, at least long enough for my enjoyment.
Okay.
Which I hope is going to be for many years, but I don't think I haven't had any issues with these, and they've been in there for 3 or 4 years now.
Oh, it's thunder season here. My Sheltie loves thunder.
Mm.
What variety of sedum do you use? What the person who asked the question said that he has seen various ones in garden stores.
Okay, I don't know. This is one that it's one that we have in our yard, and my wife planted it. I'm not exactly certain where we got it. We may have had it. We've been here 22 years, so I honestly don't know that it's an actual variety, so to speak. I
Okay.
apologize.
Okay. He said he's asking for somebody who would need to start a garden with some. So I guess if you're interested, you plant whatever it is that you're going to plant with the ultimate goal of having forest on your model railroad.
Mhm.
It would be fun. And then the next question that popped in is you already talked about a flower using dead flower stalks from domestic Nandina as the basic tree form, and that's what you had
Mhm.
just talked about.
Yes, yes. I think that if I were to use it again, um, I would be a little more careful in applying the glue. That
Hmm.
was what I did at that point in time, was dip the thing in a white glue and then sprinkled it with the foliage, and it just
Hmm.
went everywhere. So all the trunks, all the branches look like fur. Um, so that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That I understand. Very cool. Let me check Facebook and see if Facebook is. Nope, not so.
Yes, and so the uh, what I found is that the soap and water, the Clorox starts, and when I harvest it, it's winter, and so we've already had a couple of frosts and freezes, and so the temperature is one help there. The other piece is that between the bleach solution and then the soap and water will take care of the bugs. Probably, I don't know, 50, 60 or 70, something like that. I mean, I have, when I was asked to, volunteer to do at the clinic for the Palmetto Division, I thought it was going to be a hands-on clinic. And so I went and harvested all the sedum and stocked up on it. And then it turned out that it was a presentation. It's like I didn't realize that the clinic equaled presentation at the time, and it wasn't a hands-on clinic. I'd only joined the NMRA probably a year prior to that, and so I wasn't familiar with the definition. And so I had the materials and was making them, and it just goes by so quickly. I mean, you noticed in the one slide where on the pink foam there were probably 25 little stalks of sedum right there. So that's 25 trees. And if I break off some of the smaller pieces to use as undergrowth, well, it's just more and more.
Mhm.
Now, the one that's in the garage, that, that was left over from one of my wife's projects or something that I had bought. So no, it's not a particular brand. I have Krylon, I have Rust-Oleum, there's Valspar that was in that's sold by Lowe's and Home Depot. There's there's a variety of them. I prefer flat. I have used satin, but I would not, and certainly you don't want a gloss unless you're modeling a wet scene, in which case you might want a little bit of that.
Yeah, okay. Anything else out of the chat there, Perry?
Well, it's interesting because somebody has commented that they're only hearing Chuck's side of the conversation. They're not actually hearing us.
No,
So
they're hearing you. It was me I'm doing a Marty Jenkins thing. I was on mute, so
That
technology.
okay. Mute. Yeah, that makes I got it. Okay. No, there aren't any more questions. I like your method of constructing trees. I sadly am lazy when it comes to tree construction, so I don't construct any of my own.
Mhm.
I buy them. But my ground cover and I like building kits and building my own locomotives and painting them. So instead of devoting time to building trees, I build locomotives, and so it's a preference. But I like yours, and the pictures of your layout were really cool because you could see the what appeared to be dense forest, which is what I would kind of expect to see.
Mhm. The backdrop that I painted, and it was from instructions online, um, painted that, and the intent, again, it's an illusion. I mean, it gives the suggestion, and like you, I enjoy building the kits. Enjoy building kits of structures, building kits of rolling stock. I built kits many years ago for the locomotives that I have. But I really wanted to do something that was achievable in a short period of time. And so I just
Hmm.
try to force myself not to worry about those things. You do try to move everything forward, but okay, let's get the backdrop done. Let's get the trees. Let's get the ground cover. Let's get this and move on to the next item. And then at some point go back and with a new perspective, make some improvements or choose
Hmm.
not to and just choose to operate it.
Hmm.
I like this one. It's, I mean, in some of the pictures you saw, what appears to be grass or weeds growing between the ties, and I made that. I experimented it with, bales of bales of pine straw come with this orange propylene twine,
Yes.
and so I took the twine and cut it in sections, took a wire brush or taped it together at the base, cut it with a wire brush to make make it feathery looking, and then painted it with craft paint just to see what would happen. And cut it short so that it wouldn't foul the couplers. And there you had it. It was a little bit overgrown. And then there were some that were a little taller, and that was an experiment with a cocoa mat. So you wipe your feet on a cocoa mat,
Hmm.
and sometimes that breaks loose. So I said, well, let me see if I can grab, a small tuft of that and see what effect that has. That's really just trying
And
different effects on it and see what it looks like.
now I like your technique for weeds between the tracks, as I've just been working on a section on my railroad that I've got a relatively long siding that's only used for maintenance of way equipment, and
Mhm.
so having weeds growing up between the track or between the ties would be really useful. I like that idea with the twine, and I think I'm gonna have to go find some of it.
It turned out really simple. I mean, it was something that was in the garage laying around, and
Hmm.
some blue painter's tape around around the base of it to tie it or hold it very tightly together, and then a
Hmm.
wire brush to really shred it, and
Hmm.
um, and then just craft paint again, the water-based acrylic craft paint.
You brush painted it on?
Yeah, yeah.
And then what did you adhere it to the layout with?
Well, I drill a little hole
And
because
and, and
I cut the painter's tape. So the painter's tape does two things. It holds it in place while I'm
okay,
painting it, and then I cut it in the middle of the painter's tape, and now I've got two tufts.
okay,
And I
got
just
it.
take a drill bit about that size, drill it, and then plant it.
Very cool.
So it was easy.
I like that idea. I'm gonna have to do that. I'll just have to do a bunch of them.
They go by pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because if you take a long string of that twine that binds up a pine straw bale and cut it into sections that aren't very long. Well, maybe an inch and a half long, and wrap a piece of painter's tape around it really tightly. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Other questions from out there in viewage land? Let's check.
I got a quick question that one of the other team members have flicked through to us is, do you have any recommendations for a beginner that is a little bit hesitant on making their own trees? What would you recommend as a starting point to get going?
But I think I think the dead easiest thing to do is if they have access to twigs, from fallen twigs, is to start there, and just do some with the intention that you're going to throw it away. It's just learning. There was one on the photos that I think it was a twig from a pine tree or something, and sprayed it and you can even craft paint it with the acrylics just to see what you can do. It's because what's the investment? A few drops of paint and a twig that was in the yard. And it's just a matter of just giving it a try. And then if you don't like it, well, the craft paint dries very quickly, so try a different color on it. Sometimes I'll brush it. Sometimes I'll just use almost a very dry brush and just tap it. So it creates just a mottled effect, and just trying it and seeing what the effect is. That's how I started. And and then I said, well, let me try these little sedum things because they look like trees.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I guess you could also, any of those trees that you're not happy for a foreground tree or something like that can always be used in the background, along a backdrop or whatnot, and sort of hidden away just to bulk up your forest.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much variety in nature that even some of them that have snapped off, well, that's just a tree that got topped in a thunderstorm.
Yep.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Anything else that you can see over there, Harry?
No, sir. I haven't seen anything else pop in yet. No, sir. That's it.
That's it? Oh, well, we'll waste another couple of minutes away. Chuck, why don't you tell us about your railroad that you're actually modelling currently, and give us a bit of a background on that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, so as I mentioned on the earlier slide, what I wanted to do, the interest I had was something I thought rural Georgia in the 1920s. My father grew up in rural Georgia and grew up in the 1920s there. So I thought, well, what's available? So I looked at Sanborn maps, and I looked at a couple of different towns there with the Sanborn fire insurance maps. Came across a track plan, I think it was for Waynesboro, Georgia, that was it was like an interesting. And so I used a lot of compression to fit it into 8 feet, because the actual track looked like it was the sidings looked like they were probably a good ½ mile or more of length. And so this was much smaller, but it had an interesting crossover and seemed unusual. So I thought, why not? It really didn't. So then I looked at what I had left over from that had been in boxes and decided, well, let me reuse some of these. And actually, I had done a lot of research online of European layouts, the small switching layouts, and thought I got interested that way on what I could do in a small space and something that's achievable in not years. Well, it has taken a few years with work, and there you have it. And then again, so I chose a time, probably 1920s, late 1920s. I liked that. It was interesting. smaller locomotives, single sheet boxcars, and just that's where I got started. So I've got quite a bit to do. And then I picked up that Varney switcher at a flea market. And I thought, well, okay, that doesn't really fit the 1920s. So I've made provisions for a second shelf. I'm not starting it yet, but to model the late 40s, early 50s. And so when I was growing up, I modeled just about anything. It really wasn't being very prototypical. So in the back of my mind, I may put a second shelf on there that would be a little bit later.
So what railroad did you what railroad serves Waynesboro? I'm not sure what would have served Waynesboro in the 20s.
Well, the Savannah and Atlanta,
Okay.
the Southern, and what would have become the Central of Georgia, I think.
Okay.
So there were a couple like that that would have come in there or been in that general vicinity. So that's what I'm thinking. Of course,
Very
none
cool.
of the locomotives have the names on them of the railroad. So
Yeah.
I haven't gotten that far yet.
There's always more to do.
There is. There's always more. But that's the thought in the back of my mind is it's not the hills that I painted. I had hoped that they were going to be more of just a rolling type hill of sort of eastern Georgia or northeast Georgia. So it's not flat, it's not the Rocky Mountains, it's not the Appalachians, and little, kind of cleared areas and whatnot. The track is actually, I used sanded grout and unsanded grout, and essentially filled in some of the tracks so that it looks like they're in the dirt, essentially.
Yep.
And while it was still a little bit wet, cut the ruts for cars and painted it.
Very cool.
My intent is to, the industries is put them on a piece of foam board or a masonite and then be able to swap them out. So if I want to run a different industry for a few months, I can do that with different types of cars servicing it. So that's the intent.
I like that idea. That seems interesting. And in a space that's manageable.
Yes, it is. Can't get too carried away.
Well, you can, but it can be expensive.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate all that y'all have done here, setting this up. Appreciated the opportunity to give this clinic and hope that I've answered a few of people's questions. I went through it quickly. I didn't want to be too late. That may have been a mistake, but I enjoyed talking with y'all.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It was a great clinic, and I always look forward to learning some new techniques. So I'll may endeavour to put those onto my layout. So I think we'll cut to a couple of ads, and we'll get ready for our final 2 clinics to come through.
Yep.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Thank you all.
Thank